Turok has always been on my radar, but until this year, I've never actually sat down and played it. Based on the comic book series of the same name, Turok Dinosaur Hunter was really the first FPS on the Nintendo 64 that made a splash. In fact, I think Turok broke new ground in the console shooter market by being one of the first halfway decent FPS games on a home console. Of course, you had Alien vs Predator on the Atari Jaguar, and Alien Trilogy on PlayStation, which both received critical success, but Turok set itself apart from the rest with its setting and level design. While a ton of GoldenEye's legacy and lasting success rested on its multiplayer components, Turok was a single-player experience through and through. Turok doesn't focus on the story at all, but I guess I should probably get it out of the way. Now, Turok isn't the name of a protagonist or anything, but instead it's a title passed down from generation to generation, and the Turok is assigned with the job of protecting Earth and the Lost Land. Tao Set is a time-traveling, ass-kicking, and hub-world-exploring Native American, and he is the Turok in this game at least. The villain of the game, known as the Campaigner, plans to take over the world and destroy the barrier between Earth and the Lost Land, and it's up to the Turok to stop that. Very primitive storyline, but whatever. It's a shooter from 1997 on the Nintendo 64. I'm not expecting Citizen Kane. I am glad that Iguana Entertainment, the developers of Turok, used the prehistoric dinosaur backdrop instead of the typical Space Marine plot that seemed to be in every FPS game at the time. Sure, the Turok character wasn't invented by them, and Turok was a comic book initially, but still I appreciate that they went in a different direction. The story takes a backseat anyway to Turok's level design, which was quite innovative at the time. It's hard to really critique Turok's design approach because it was so revolutionary when the game was released, but it isn't perfect at the same time. First off, Turok is split up into 8 different levels, or hub worlds, and the goal of the game is to collect all of the keys in each level to unlock the final boss zone. Now, picking up keys to progress through levels was nothing new for first-person shooters at the time, but the 8 levels in question are an entirely different beast. They were huge in scale, and even now, it can still take some time to navigate each level. Exploration is the biggest component of Turok, and I'd argue that it's more important than the combats. Finding each key will sometimes require players to backtrack to previous areas in a level, which can be annoying because there will be moments where you can't revisit areas you've already been, and from there you need to beat the level, go back to the hub, hop through the level portal again, and then find the key you're looking for. This can get very tedious, but Turok was one of the first FPS games of its kind, so again, it's hard to complain that much about it. Also, once you get the hang of Turok's overall level design, you'll no doubt get a better sense of where the keys are in the game. The levels are quite expansive for Nintendo 64 standards especially, and speaking of which, there was a lot of fog to compensate for the technical limitations of the system. With that said, I couldn't imagine how turned around I would get by playing the original Nintendo 64 version of Turok with the fog included. Landmarks that you can note down to get your bearings are hard to come across anyway, so I would get very frustrated if fog was placed on top of everything. Luckily, Night Dive Studios worked on an excellent port for Turok, and re-released the game on PC with mouse and keyboard controls, graphical enhancements, an even better frame rate, and a way better draw distance. Each of the levels in the game feature swimming sections, climbing sections, and of course the divisive platforming sections. I don't hate the platforming segments in Turok, but I don't find them particularly fun either. On PC at least, the platforming in this game isn't that frustrating, and it's pretty easy to rush through it, but that doesn't necessarily make it good. People that complained about the platforming found in Doom Eternal should take a look at Turok and count their fucking blessings. In In almost every level, you're hopping across single blocks, and if you die, you're forced to go back to a checkpoint, which could be ages away. Yes, so Turok relies on a checkpoint system with extra lives involved, and also a limited save option. This is very old school game design, and it's perplexing why they didn't just have a save feature where the player can save the game anytime they wish, similar to its PC shooter contemporaries. Turok was a large game at the time, with plenty of locations to explore and tons of items to collect, but it still latches on to these outdated features of preserving your game. For the way that this game propelled the console FPS genre forward with new innovative design ideas, I'm just surprised that there isn't a way to save at any point. Oh well, at least you can save periodically, and aside from the platforming sections, it's not like you're going to die too much by the enemies or anything. I just wish that Night Dive snuck in a manual save option into the re-release. But I guess being 100% faithful to the original Nintendo 64 game isn't a bad approach to take. So we all know that exploration is a major part of Turok, and it's what the game will be most remembered for, but what about the weapons and gunplay? It's good, but Turok is not your traditional first-person shooter, and the game is not about obliterating all of the enemies on screen. In fact, the enemies that you find in Turok respawn after a while, and in the later parts of the game, you pretty much try to bypass them or use them to farm for resources. I love that you initially encounter regular dinosaurs and gunmen without any armor on, but as the game goes on, the dinosaurs become more kitted out with weaponry, and the gunmen are suited up for battle more. They take the same enemies that you see at the start of the game and buff them up as you collect more weapons too. Speaking of the weapons, the selection of guns in Turok is pretty decent. Before you even pick up a gun, you are equipped with a knife and a bow. Later on, you can pick up a limited amount of explosive arrows for the bow, and I like this aspect of combat because it makes the bow useful even during the endgame. You can also obtain explosive rounds for the shotgun, which takes enemies out pretty well, and they are satisfying to use. So yeah, the regular pistol and shotgun are here, but they get outclassed by the machine gun and automatic shotgun when you pick them up later in the game. They both feel really fun to fire, and that's good considering that they'll be your workhorse weapons in Turok. The minigun, the pulse rifle, the grenade and rocket launchers are also tacked onto the roster, and all of these have been in FPS games before, but that's not to say they're bad. Turok shooting is quite satisfying on the whole, but again, later on in the game, you'll be running past the tougher enemies in order to get where you need to go quicker. It's not like there is a total kill count or something because they respawn anyway, so Turok kinda embraces this run and gun style of gameplay. On the Nintendo 64, the enemies you'd encounter appeared as way more threatening due to the low draw distance, and the pace of the game for first time players probably was slower than intended. Turok is a run and gun shooter with heavy exploration, similar to a game like Metroid where you don't kill all of the enemies and you just keep moving. The first level is set in the jungle, as is most of the game, and this is a great introductory level. There are 6 keys to collect, which is a higher amount than how many you need to find in other levels, as well as the first piece of the Chrono Scepter. This is the most powerful weapon in the game, and while it's not required to beat the final boss or anything, it is just another thing to look out for, which is cool. Finding the Chrono Scepter pieces kinda reminds me of Doom 64, and how players can find the demon keys to upgrade the Unmaker, resulting in the final boss being way easier to deal with. The first level follows the Romero horseshoe design, as there are many sections that loop around so new players don't get too lost or anything. Early on, there is a secret pistol you can find if you swim along this hidden passageway, and I love this secret because the pistol is sitting in plain sight, so it's then up to the player to figure out how to get to it. It's not that difficult to locate the pistol at all, but that swift introduction of secret areas is pivotal for new players. Some of Turok's level design doesn't hold up, but this opening level is very well done. While it aimed to impress players back in the day on Nintendo 64 with its enormity, it still guided them along and got them used to the exploration aspect of the game. There's a bit of everything in this level. Caves, underwater sections, platforming, and of course the bonus areas that you can access by walking into the blue portals. Now these portals seem to appear at timed intervals, and as I said, they take you into a bonus room with tougher platforming sections. Here you can get some items, like these triangles that the manual calls life force tokens. If you collect 100 of them, you get an extra life, which shouldn't be too hard considering that these little triangles are a dime a dozen. There are less common purple tokens that you can find in secret areas and the bonus rooms, which will count for 10. Taking the old school extra life and save point systems into account, finding these purple tokens will definitely help out, and it's good to see Turok adding little things to encourage further exploration. The bonus areas that you come across are a nice little distraction, and it's interesting to see what each level's bonus rooms look like. The second level of Turok is a bit of a letdown after the first, because it's just more of the same. Sure, the platforming gets a little riskier, and the combat encounters become a little more difficult, but it's basically Jungle Part 2. Since there's only 8 levels in Turok, regardless of their size or density, I wanted them all to be very distinct. While we do get more interesting levels later on, it's a shame that level 2 is more of that familiar jungle setting. At least we're getting further up into the sky, and there's even a point in the level where the player is above the clouds. The ancient city is up next, and this level must have looked impressive at the time. There are many temples and little buildings that you are able to enter, and more often than not, they have some items in them. Instead of jumping across random pillars up in the sky like in the initial jungle stages, this level has you platforming on top of buildings, and it's awesome. Turok's levels from here on out are way more spaced out, which to me artificially increases the exploration factor of the game. The boss of level 3 is just some dude in a truck, and blowing the truck up is surprisingly very easy. Taking the dude out after takes a little more time, but still very manageable. The game gives you plenty of ammo in the arena to do so, and there's plenty of room to circle strafe around. In general, the boss fights in Turok are pretty understated, but I actually don't hate them as much as I thought I would. I have no idea why, but I am really not a fan of boss fights in first-person shooters, so going into Turok, I was not looking forward to dealing with them. However, they are not bad at all. A little bullet spongy? Sure. A little too predictable with their attack patterns? I guess, but that being said, these boss fights aren't a complete pain in the ass, so Turok is a cut above the rest in that regard. Also, I love that if you die during a boss fight and come back by using up an extra life, the boss's health bar remains the exact same. That way you don't lose any progress and you can continue fighting him as if nothing ever happened. This is absolutely fantastic. I applaud Iguana Entertainment for including this. The Ruins has a blue tint to it, and that's all I can really remember about this level. There is a platforming section where you have to get the order of the platforms correct to not come up short. If you fuck it up, you have to walk all the way back to the start of the sequence, which takes more time than it needs to. Now that kind of backtracking doesn't occur too much in Turok, but it can be such a slog getting back up to where you need to be. The Catacombs is the start of the second half of the game, and while the level doesn't feel that long if you know what you're doing, the exploring you have to do beforehand kinda gets tiresome in this level specifically. There are some parts that you can easily miss, and then you're running about the place like like a twat for half an hour, trying to analyze what you've not combed over. At least this insect boss at the end of the level looks cool and has some frantic AI as well. The level that comes afterwards is long but incredibly straightforward compared to the ruins and the catacombs. You can tell that some of the fog was hard-coded into the game when you approach the peak of the treetop village. Anyway, I do like this level. The opening section is great, with the player scaling small ledges, leaping down to other platforms, and killing enemies that are tucked into this hollowed out mountain, as they take potshots at you like dickheads. The titular treetop village is also nice to blast through, and although it's on the longer side, this is definitely one of my favourite levels in Turok. The penultimate level of the game looks completely different from anything seen before, as we've entered the Lost Land. Instead of the lush, green forest setting, the Lost Land is a barren desert filled with lava pits, wide chasms with tiny platforms to hop over, triceratops that are ridden by dudes with laser guns, raptors with fucking chain guns attached to their tiny arms, giant robots, and there's also much more shit going on. This level ramps everything up to 11, and the second half of it leans into the technological stuff, which gears you up for the final confrontation. At this point in the game, Turok resembles Quake 2 more than anything, and it's pretty refreshing to see. This level had me turned around and scratching my head as to what I was doing wrong, but the level's unique aesthetic kept me engaged. Overall, I had a good time with Turok, but I would put it in the same category of enjoyment as the first Metroid game. Both of them went against the grain and as a result, pushed their genres forward. They also lent more credibility to the NES and Nintendo 64 respectively. Metroid proved that they could make a side-scroller game with one enormous map to explore on Nintendo. As for Turok, that game demonstrated that shooters don't have to be confined to a traditional level structure, and that exploration can be put to the forefront. While the newer Turok games improved on the formula, nothing can take away from the fact that the original Turok was the first good Nintendo 64 shooter, coming out before Doom 64 and GoldenEye. Turok's biggest accomplishment, however, is that its release began the meteoric rise of console FPS games.